We are at 24. Feel like the TPT uh fundraiser, their pledge drive. We got to get that next one and then we'll hit our goal. My wife just said that I should find a different day job because I'm not good at pitching, apparently. Or at least pledge drives. Oh, we just hit 26. Welcome, everybody. I am John Doan, Shoreview City Council member and the president for Ramsey County League of Local Governments this year. Uh, Want to welcome our members and friends because we have an excellent program and speakers this morning. We're going to get an insider's perspective on the upcoming elections in August for the primary and the general election in November. I'm particularly excited for two big reasons about this conversation. One, as a longtime election judge for over 20 years with Ramsey County, it is great to understand kind of what happens behind the curtain as we are more the front lines as an election judge for those elections. And then secondly, my city, the city of Shoreview, about 2.5 years ago, uh, chose to uh, leave that work with from our city clerk and contract with Ramsey County Elections. And I have to say that it was one of the best decisions we could have made for our constituents and for our residents. It has, I think, created a lot of stability and also remove a number of liabilities and costs for us. And so just put that little plug out there for any other cities that may be considering it as well. I know that many cities are proud to run their own elections through their clerks, and that's great. But if you are considering it and would like to talk about that, happy to make that recommendation to Ramsey County Elections and to discuss how that process went with the city of Shoreview. With that, I'm going to introduce Commissioner Tara Jarbit Singh, who we all know and love. So she needs no introduction to this group, but I'm going to ask her to introduce our speakers.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited about this presentation as well. As John said, I'm a Ramsey County Commissioner representing District 1, so that represents Arden Hills, Mounds View, Shoreview, Venice Heights, North Oaks, Jim Lake, Whitebird Township, and parts of Spring Lake Park and Blaine. And I too have been an election judge when my kiddos were little. That was something I did every year. And I've also been a longtime member of the League of Women Voters, trying to get folks to participate in their elections and be educated about things that were going on civically. So this is get to nerd out a little bit. And my latest connection to all of this is that I am on my first year serving on the Ramsey County Canvassing Board. So I'll get to have a whole different level of involvement with elections this year. So I'm looking forward to that. But we'll get right to the program. I have the honor of introducing our speakers, and we're going to start with David Triplett. He is the deputy auditor in Ramsey County, Minnesota, where he acts as the county's head election official. With over 23 years of election administration experience, David has been part of 6 presidential elections, 2 statewide recounts, and helped the city of St. Paul implement ranked choice voting in 2011. And I believe too, we were just talking about, I think the highest number of special elections last year. So, David, take it away.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, for the introduction and council member as well. Thank you for your service as an election judge in Ramsey County. I know we've got a few folks probably in this room who have also served as election judges. So we appreciate your service. It takes quite a few folks to make sure we staff our polling places sufficiently. Also, I see some familiar names in this room, so I'm glad to see folks who we see in other capacity in the election work. It obviously just doesn't end with the cities and the counties and the states, so there's a lot of folks. And then for the folks here I don't know, thank you for joining us today and giving me this time to discuss some of the election issues this year in Ramsey County. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll talk county elections for the next 15 minutes here. There we go. I assume folks can see it, and if not, let me know. Great. Thanks, John. Again, Dave Triplett, Deputy County Auditor. For those of you in the property tax world, you probably know my boss, the County Auditor, Tracy West. In elections, the County Auditor is the head election official for the county. Um, in the metro counties, you will see the auditor have dedicated election offices. So for those of you who have interacted with our election office, you're aware that Ramsey County has a dedicated staff to this function, and that's common within the metro. But you get in greater Minnesota, the auditor and their staff will do everything from property taxes, assessing, forfeited lands, the whole basket of duties that the auditor has to perform. So I know most of you are probably familiar with elections in Minnesota, so I'm not going to cover the 101 stuff. A lot of you are elected, and a lot of you work in the clerk's office or other areas where elections aren't new to you. But to level set, the first two slides here I always like to use just to kind of reiterate who's in charge of what in Minnesota. There's a lot of levels of government involved in elections, and that's on purpose to kind of keep things separated out and checks on each other and clear duties of who does what. So obviously the secretary is here today and he'll discuss his office's roles in elections, but at a real high level he's the head election official in the state of Minnesota. The the Secretary of State's office's main duties with the counties is to train our staff and support our staff throughout the year. So there's going to be a wide variety of questions or situations that arrive. So we do rely on their support. And then they train us annually, and that actually just occurred 2 weeks ago. So they are required to train all the local county election officials every couple of years. Administratively, they provide the statewide voter registration system and the election reporting system. So on election night, when you're all hitting refresh, that website, that reporting system is supported by the state's office. And then the voter registration system. So if you're looking up your registration or you're putting in your registration, yes, the county administers that process, but the Secretary of State's office supports the system that we secure and enter our registrations into. And then the Secretary can talk about their administrative duties. They do a lot more than the things I've listed here. But for this purpose, that's their role. The counties are the next level. As I said, the auditors, the head election official in the county. Their role really is to train the city officials, perform absentee and early voting, manage the voter registration records, and then lay out the ballot, the printing of the ballots, and the reporting of the results. And for those of you who have been performing some of the city duties, this is probably not new to you because we have to work together to achieve a lot of these duties that the county has to perform. And then the final two levels are the cities and school districts. So the city clerk is or the municipal clerk for the school districts. You are the head election official in your city. And really, the cities are the ones that voters are interacting with the most. You're managing the polling places, you're managing early voting, you're assigning and training election judges. Then you have other administrative duties, such as canvassing your results, doing campaign finance, reporting for your local offices. Unique to Ramsey County is, and as Councilmember Jones said, we contract with a lot of you cities and school districts to perform these duties on your behalf. That goes back to 1996. St. Paul, Mayor Coleman, when he was elected, ran on combining some of the functions of the city and the county, and the elections office was one of those. And then starting in 2012, more and more cities asked us to contract. So we're not out there doing the sales pitch to get the contracts, but a lot of our cities have came to the conclusion that it builds some efficiencies. You get an office of expertise every year and kind of clears up some time for the city. So in Ramsey County, we're unique that we carry out the city and school district activities for everybody but the city of Maplewood. And they have a great team set up to carry out the duties for those residents. And then finally is the federal government. Historically, the federal government has had minimal role in administering elections and really kind of guaranteed and enforced those rights to vote. So things like the Constitution, the amendments in the Constitution, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Help America Vote Act in 2001. If you look at a lot of those acts, they're really focused on fundamental rights, access to polling place, access to voting, security of the voting systems. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the potential Save America Act, which would impact the administration of elections. I'm not going to get into that today. I know if the secretary might have some talking points on that, but if you have questions around the impacts of the SAVE Act, we did discuss it at a commissioner board workshop recently, as well as in some other forums, or you can always just email me directly or call me, and we can talk about how that might potentially impact the administration of elections. And then finally, what does the elections office look like? Councilmember Doan in his introduction said something about, elections were something that maybe a lot of people didn't think about. And there was this stereotype that on election day, our judges would go to the closet, pull everything out, and then on election night, put it in the closet and lock it up for another year. But there is a whole infrastructure around elections. We've got to do everything from communications to support our many technologies. We have to pay election judges, so we have to act as HR. We have to survey polling locations to make sure they're accessible. We have to logistically get supplies to these locations. So we have warehouses. So to achieve this, we have 8 full-time staff. We have limited duration employees because there isn't elections every year unless it's last year. And these limited duration employees get benefits and time off. But when we don't have a lot of work, they can reduce their hours and then pick them back up when we have elections. We require a lot of seasonal staff, up to 30, and 30 is a minimal number. During the 2020 elections, we were up to 240 seasonal staff, and one of my jobs every day was just to go count how many people we had working here. And then we require 15 plus 100 election judges. We've actually assigned over 2,000 to support certain elections. We try to get 10 to 12 election judges in every polling place across the county. Some in Roseville will have up to 20 election judges just because we see high election day turnout in those communities. And that's the best way to ensure that lines stay short and that we can effectively move people through the polling places. So we employ a lot of folks. I've got a few minutes left here, so I wanted to keep it within my 15 minutes. So if I'm not covering something you're interested in, let me know. But given the group here, I thought, going over the 101 stuff was probably not relevant. So I wanted to touch on a few topics I'm hearing from a lot. And so that could be maybe questions you're all getting, or perhaps some of you in this room have asked me these questions. So I'm going to focus on security of a few of our vital systems. And that's where we're getting a lot of attention. So the voting system. How do we secure our voting system? Well, the voting system at a real high level is just a few things. It's the ballots you mark, it's the ballot count that you put your ballot in, and it's the result reporting you see on election night. So it's the whole infrastructure to create ballots, count ballots, and then report the results from those ballots. And so what are we doing to secure our voting system? The best thing we can do is meet the federal standards. So since 2001, there has been a body called the EAC, the Elections Assistance Commission, and one of their duties is to certify voting systems to make sure they meet federal laws, security standards, accessibility standards. So the picture on the screen here is an accessible device that if you're short of sight or your hand shakes when you vote, like my grandfather would use this device because it would mark the ballot, and then he could review the ballot and put it through the voting machine. And so the federal government has these standards, and we are moving to upgrade to the 2.0 standards. We're hoping to do that in 2026 here. The Secretary of State's office has certified equipment to the 2.0 standards, and going forward, no voting systems at the federal level will be certified if they don't meet the 2.0 standards. Also, we have a non-network voting system. So for some of you, in Ramsey County, our results come in a little later. We start a little later reporting our results. And that's because we don't have a networked voting system. We can't transmit results from our polling place. We require election judges to physically bring those to us. And so 2 teams of bipartisan election judges, after the polling place secures those materials, brings them to our office where we then manually upload those into our system to transmit the results to the Secretary of State's office. If you have questions about that, we do have a write-up about why is Ramsey County reporting this way, what led to this decision. But going forward, the 2.0 standards will require every voting system to operate in a non-networked environment. So we'll see more of what Ramsey County is doing across the country as these 2.0 systems are implemented. Our voting system is in a secure space. We have chain of custody. We audit logs, who can access, who cannot. Physical security is very important because we are in a non-networked environment. And then as you're all well aware, We use paper ballots in Minnesota. When I talk to colleagues in other states, they'll say, what's one thing we can do to provide security? Well, a paper ballot, because at the end of the day, if the voting system is compromised, you can go back to the paper ballot. Or for those of you here who have been involved in recounts, it's a great chance to go look at everything. Everything's on the table. Both candidates and parties and public can observe the process. So paper ballots are a key way we secure our voting systems in Minnesota. And then for those of you who've been at a polling place, the election judges are a great line of security. And then election judges are also staffed bipartisanly. The parties are required to give us lists of folks to serve as judges, and we're required to balance the parties at each polling place. And two judges will always watch every activity. And so we rely on that physical security of our election judges. And then it's auditable. You can data request our cast vote record, and you can audit the voting system yourself. And actually, every election, we get a few folks who will do this. And post the 2025 St. Paul mayor's race, our cast vote record was available online for anybody to audit that election. So that auditability of the voting system is another key feature of our security. Securing the voter registration database. There's been a lot of attention on our voter registration records and how we secure access to those records. So as I said, the Secretary of State's office provides the system, and then the county auditors are in charge of the data and maintaining the data within their county. So the county, to access the system, there's that two-factor authentication. And what that requires is a valid login and then a valid code that we get through an authenticator app or through a grid card. We verify users. The state obviously has to approve those users, and then there also have to be on approved devices. So if I'm an approved user, which I'm actually not, I can't access it from my phone or my work laptop. It has to be accessed from a device that the state is aware of and is looking for. And then we got to maintain those users. So we are regularly looking at our list. We're looking with the government or with the state who has access, who doesn't have access. And then we've got to properly train and monitor our users too, who are within the voter registration system. So what does daily maintenance looks like? Well, we got to verify our active records. We want to ensure that all the records in our system are accurate and tied to residents who are eligible to vote. We also want to verify our address ranges. You've all probably heard of the UPS store that you can register at, or a PO box, which is not legal, but that range is maybe available. So it's really important that our staff monitor the address ranges in the system and ensure that only residential addresses are in the system. And for those of you who perform this function for your city, you'll send us the new plots or the new addresses or the new residential blocks, and that way we can ensure that our address ranges are accurate. And then from time to time, we do need to forward violations for investigation. This could just be people falsifying registration documents or people falsifying their address range. We don't see many of these, but after an election where we interact with 290,000 voters, we'll get 4 or 5 of these that we need to investigate. And then finally, there are redundancies in place in case we can't access the system. You might remember Halloween of 2020. Halloween is actually one of our busiest early voting days because it's a day or two before the general election. And on Halloween, one of our busiest days, we lost access to the statewide voter registration system, but we could still process voters because we had an analog backup in place, and is actually legally required for us to be in place. But the process is implemented and allowed us to continue serving hundreds of voters offline until we were back online. And then finally, how do we secure the voted ballots? We get a lot of questions about, okay, Dave, you've been telling me that the paper ballots are, the kind of the final backup, the final point of trust in an election. What do you do to secure those? Well, we have, Secretary probably knows this number off the top of his head, but we've got about 20 to 30,000 bipartisan and nonpartisan election judges across the state. And one of their final duties is to audit and secure the ballots in a secure ballot box and audit and seal those up. And hopefully they're never unsealed. State law says we can only unseal those for a recount or by a court order. And so at the end of the day, the ballots are audited and secured by thousands of election judges working in teams of major political parties to secure those ballots. And then candidates can appoint ballot guardians. We don't see these often. Actually, I think in Ramsey County, we haven't had one since the '08 U.S. Senate recount, where both parties had folks guarding the ballots. I won't get into what they can and cannot do. That's all in law, and it's clear in statute what their ability is to perform the ballot guardian duty. But it is another layer of security. If candidates or individuals have concerns with how the ballots are being secured, they can have ballot guardians appointed to essentially monitor the area where the ballots are secured. But they are in a secure facility. They're returned to our office every day and put in the secure facility. We have a log of who accesses this secure facility. And we also require 2 judges of different political parties to enter and exit whenever going into this secure facility as well. And it's caged. We've done security reviews with the Secretary of State's security team, where they've given us great advice on things from, put the cage to the wall, have a key locker off site, have audits with these, have prevention for if you get fire damage and the water goes off. And so it's been very helpful to do these walkthroughs. And then finally, here to wrap up my last couple minutes, just a reminder of ways to vote in Minnesota. So you might be hearing from your residents or constituents about, how do I prepare to vote? The best way to prepare to vote is to go to mnvotes.gov. That's the Secretary of State's website. You can confirm your registration, update your registration, view your sample ballot, view your voting districts. You can do a whole other slew of information. So if you're hearing from people not sure if they're registered, worried about their registration, a lot of that can be confirmed at mnvotes.gov. Or they can always call our office and we can walk through it with them. But voters have 3 ways to vote. They can vote on election day, they can vote by mail, or they can vote in person early 18 days before an election. In Ramsey County, we still see the majority of our voters on election day, but that number's going down. It used to be close to, 98% when I probably first started working here. Now we're close to about 60 to 65% of our voters vote on election day. So we still see a lot of folks and serve a lot of folks at those election day polling places. Vote by mail starts 46 days before an election in Minnesota. And so voters can request an application online at the state's website, or they can request it by filling out an application with the county or with the city. I'm sure some of you cities have these applications available. We always tell voters expect 4 to 6 days of mail service in the Twin Cities. So if you're sitting on your ballot a week before the election and you're not sure it's going to get to us, there are means to get the ballot to our office. An agent, you can deliver it yourself. If you show up at your polling place, though, we will not accept that ballot, but we'll just put you through the process to vote there on election day at your polling place. And then finally, early voting. We've really had early voting since 2016 when the legislature authorized no excuse voting, but true early voting, which has the administrative features that you think of with early voting, will be implemented for the first time this year in Minnesota for voters. And you can start doing that 18 days before the election. For those of you who have voted early at either the Shoreview Library or the Roseville Library, this is a very popular activity for voters. They really like to vote early. And I would guess that either the Roseville Library and then the Shoreview Library are the 2 busiest early voting locations in the state of Minnesota. So we do see a lot of excitement about the early voting activity. I got 1 minute, so I'll just say the point of this slide was to let folks know that there are a lot of events open to the public for elections. So if you're hearing folks who have just concerns about how elections work or just questions, send them to any one of these events. They can be an election judge. They can just come to our training and see how we're training our judges. There's a public accuracy test before an election and a post-election review after the election. There's the ballot board is open to the public. Election night returns are open to the public. Recounts are open to the public. And so a lot of events, and all these events are staffed by our citizen election judges, generally representing both major political parties. So that concludes my quick presentation about everything in Ramsey County. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, email, voicemail. But otherwise, I'll turn it back to the commissioner, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That's a lot. And I will say I've been at some of David's previous presentations, and he is kind of making the circuit, as many people are, in anticipation of the of elections. So there is a fuller slide deck, and he's happy to answer any questions and get into the details. But we're going to move on to Secretary Simon. Steve Simon has served as Minnesota's Chief Elections Administrator since 2015. As Secretary of State, he partners with township, city, and county officials to organize elections on behalf of Minnesota's nearly 4 million eligible voters and to ensure that the election system is fair. He also oversees a wide range of services for Minnesota businesses and administers the Safe at Home Address Confidentiality Program for people whose personal safety is at risk, often due to physical abuse or threats. Simon previously served in the Minnesota House of Representatives for 10 years, representing the communities of St. Louis Park and Hopkins. He also served as Assistant Attorney General of Minnesota and worked as a lawyer in private practice for several years. And I just want to say, as a county official this last year and a half, I also want to appreciate that he is our advocate in Minnesota, defending free and fair elections and securing voter data. Thank you, Secretary Simon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. Thanks for the invitation, everyone. That was a great presentation by Dave Triplett. And he's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about this year's elections and our elections in general. I like to say that we who do this work are in the democracy business, and it is quite a time to be in the democracy business these days. We face some challenges, there's no question, and even I would say some threats. But I really am an optimistic, and part of that is we have good business partners in the democracy business, and one of them is Dave Triplett in Ramsey County, and he and they do an outstanding job, highly respected, highly effective in this world. So thank you, Dave, for that. We have 179 days to go. 179. That sounds like a lot of time, but it is not a lot of time. And as you heard in the prior presentation, there are a lot of moving parts to putting on an election. So I want to talk about our role in all this from the standpoint of the Office of Secretary of State. And at the end, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the federal government and its role in the elections this year and generally. So as I look over the next 179 days, I have two goals in mind, two simple goals. At the end of the day, what I'm looking to see in 179 days is high turnout and low drama. That's it. High turnout, low drama. That's my wish. Only two wishes. And I think we're going to get there. The high turnout part, I think in Minnesota, as you may know, we are perennially number one or number two or number three in the country. In Olympics terms, we're almost always on the medal stand, so to speak. If you're wondering who the reigning champ is, in other words, in the 2024 election, which state was on top, actually, it depends which set of numbers you have more confidence in. The federal government reported that we were number one in the country again in voter turnout. However, there is an equally respected set of data and numbers from the University of Florida that had us at number two, missing out on the top spot by 0.2%, if you can believe that. The worst part, they had us losing to Wisconsin. So I don't care whether it's sports or elections or anything else. That is an intolerable result, and we'll get them in 179 days. But what about the low drama part? The turnout part, I'm pretty confident in. In Minnesota, we love to vote. Doesn't matter who or what is on the ballot. This is across zip codes, county lines, all the rest. But what about the low drama part? If we're going to get low drama, that depends on all of us working as a team at all levels of government to ensure that we have smooth sailing. And we have a good track record. And I want to brag a little bit about one recent data point, you might say there. Every 2 years, MIT in Massachusetts does what they call the Elections Performance Index, where some academics there, and this is longstanding, goes back 20 years at least, they look at 19 or 20 different indicators of election administration, both on the access side and on the security side. So it's not just about voter access, it's also about security. Things like the quality of the data that we produce, things like voter turnout, things like the average wait times in lines at polling place, all across the board. And they just announced 2 weeks ago that Minnesota was number one in the country in elections performance across all those indicators. And by the way, kudos to Dave Triplett and his team, because many, maybe even most of those indicators are ones that you'd find at the local level, like wait times, things like that, functioning of the equipment, etc. So this is something, a victory that belongs to all of our local elections administrators as much as it does the state. So that's something that we're very proud of. But I want to level set a little bit about the duties of our office. As you heard in the prior presentation, we don't count votes, right? That's a common misconception, maybe not among all of you who are in local government and are schooled in some of these rules, but a lot of people assume mistakenly and understandably that we in our office count votes. We don't do that. The votes are counted obviously at the local level. We also don't, as you heard, hire or train or pay the election judges. That too happens at the local level. So what are some of the things that we do in the Office of Secretary of State? Well, in no particular order, way before anyone votes or casts a ballot, we do things like certify the elections equipment for use in Minnesota. Um, that is a process that starts at the federal level, where every piece of elections equipment must pass certain tests in an independent federal test lab. Then and only then are they even eligible for us to review and certify. And when we do that certification, that is in full public view. It's a pre-noticed public meeting. Anyone off the street can walk in. You don't have to have an engraved invitation. You don't have to live in a particular place. You don't even have to be a voter. You can come in and watch us put these machines that are seeking certification through the paces. It's usually a 1, sometimes a 2-day process. And then what we do is we certify them for use in Minnesota. Now, we are a bottom-up state, not a top-down state. In some states, it's the Secretary of State that chooses the vendor, chooses the actual types of equipment that are used. We don't do that. We've never done that. So Dave and his team, or like-minded or similarly situated teams in other counties, they get to choose which vendor they want among the ones that we put on the menu, so to speak, the ones that have been certified. So that's the certification piece. We also do things like we construct and maintain the statewide voter registration system, or SVRS, which Dave talked about. That is the spine of the system. It's not just a database, it's sort of a series of databases. It's a whole network of information that we maintain, as we must under federal law, but that local governments, counties, cities, and the like, use to input data and make sure that the data is as accurate as possible and as up to date as possible. So we are constantly, redoing and updating certain modules in that system to improve that experience for our partners at the local level. We also certify state and federal elections. We have a statewide canvassing board. Commissioner, I know you're going to be on the county canvassing board, but there's in the Minnesota Constitution a statewide canvassing board, and it's always the Secretary of State, 2 Supreme Court justices, and 2 district court judges. And one of the things that happens at that canvassing board meeting is we set up the process for post-election reviews. What is that? That's a process by which some number of precincts in every single congressional district in Minnesota are chosen at random at the state canvassing board meeting for an extra sort of deep dive, almost an audit, where we will go out, folks from our office will go out and camp out for a couple days or more and look through all the results to make sure everything lines up. And it's literally done in public view at the state canvassing board. It's live streamed. Anyone can watch it. And literally Supreme Court justices will go into an actual fishbowl, a glass fishbowl in view of everyone, and pull out pieces of paper and choose a precinct throughout the state for this sort of special audit. The other thing that we do that we just did a couple of weeks ago is we put on every 2 years a extensive conference for counties and some cities. And this is an occasion for everyone to learn from one another, share best practices, make sure we're on the same page in terms of certain aspects of training, new developments in the law. You heard from Dave that we have sort of true early voting this year for the first time. So extensive discussion, for example, at the one we had 2 weeks ago on that topic as well. We also provide some sort of legal opinions of ours, although, of course, we can't bind any particular county. We always say consult your county attorney, but we'll share our legal views and analysis on certain topics of the day. We will provide various templates on certain state requirements. We will talk about internal policies. We will provide our own view on what best practices are. Of course, we can't make anyone do anything, right? Counties have complete autonomy in most of this area, but we like to share insights with one another, and we just did that a couple of weeks ago. Election security. That is an increasingly large part of the job of the Office of Secretary of State. And I would say that you can divide election administration in this country into two halves, pre-2016 and post-2016. That's how seminal an event the 2016 election was from the standpoint of election security. Why? Because 2016 was the election where a foreign government attempted to get into our stuff. Not just Minnesota, 20 other states in addition to Minnesota. Thankfully, they didn't get anywhere. They weren't successful. The defenses held. The system worked. But it was a wake-up call to us nationally that a state actor or even a non-state actor could, if we weren't vigilant, get in our stuff, get into the actual databases and sort of successfully hack us. So the federal government really reoriented, to its credit. And one of the things that came out of the 2016 election was a designation of our election systems in this country as, quote, critical infrastructure. The critical infrastructure designation came out of 9/11, so post 2001. And it means what it sort of sounds like. If something or some segment of our national life gets critical infrastructure designation, it's sort of put on a pedestal. It gets extra protections. It is provided extra resources. Those who are in that sector get specialized information and briefings and the like. And they're the things that you would think, just as an American and as a taxpayer, that the federal government is sort of drawing a circle around for special protection. Things like hospitals, military bases, the water supply, the banking system, the utility grid. You get where I'm going with this. Key sectors of national life. And in the wake of 2016, our election systems got this critical infrastructure designation. So increasingly, what we are doing over the last decade is that cybersecurity protection, not just for ourselves, but for counties and cities as well. So we stood up with federal dollars an election security team. They literally make house calls all over the state, visit each and every one of our 87 counties, work with IT staffs on cybersecurity, but also in some counties, particularly smaller ones, work on physical security as well, not just cybersecurity, to make sure we're all on the same page and we're all secure as we need to be from outside threats that might threaten our elections and the security of those elections. Now, we have what we call an all hazards approach in our office when it comes to elections and working with our partners like Ramsey County all over the state, which means that when we're looking ahead to an election as we are now, we have to plan for a lot of things that might never materialize. In fact, there's a very low possibility that those things will ever materialize. And it's no different. Our philosophy is no different than I'm sure yours and your jobs. It's hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's what you have to do. In almost every job I know of, that's sort of in the back of everyone's mind, maybe the front of everyone's mind. So we have to plan for things like the gas leak, the power outage, the weather event, the bomb threat, right? You hope those never materialize, and they probably never will, but you still have to plan for them. So from a security standpoint, that's become a bigger part of the job. I also have to mention that we do a lot of work at the Minnesota legislature. I see a couple colleagues on this call from my days in the legislature. Paul Gardner, good to see you, Paul, my former colleague in the Minnesota House, and Chris Quapic, also someone I worked alongside in the Minnesota House as well. But we spend a lot of time at the legislature when it's in session, like right now. And, obviously counties and cities are very capable of representing their own interests as well. And we work in tandem very often on election rules, both on offense and defense. And as all of you know, in any legislative body, whether it's a city council or a township board or the legislature, there's offense and there's defense. Offense meaning working to get something done or passed that you want. Defense is the opposite, working to slow down or quietly stop something that you don't love so much. And we do both. And in the last few years, we have had a number of things on offense that we're particularly proud of. Pre-registration for voters who are getting their state ID card or driver's license. As long as they can show the stuff and show eligibility, they can be automatically registered. This is a law that red states, blue states, purple states have. It's efficient and it makes our voting rolls even more accurate than they otherwise would be. We have now pre-registration for high school students. So 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote. They're not actually registered, but they're pre-registered. They can get in line to do so. That's been effective and very popular as well. We restored the vote in Minnesota after a 20-year debate. We got to a bipartisan place on restoration of the vote for people who have left prison behind, people who have been out for years, sometimes decades, and now they can vote. And that, from an administrative standpoint, if nothing else, has been seamless and very easy. It's a bright line rule, right? If you're out, you can vote. If you're not, you can't. That is a lot easier and less confusing than the old rule, which was just a lot tougher to administer. So the other thing I wanted to mention in terms of legislative accomplishments has to do with money. As Dave Triplett knows, and as all of you know in your capacities, elections are expensive, and increasingly so for a lot of reasons. And for that reason, we have worked over the last couple of years and successfully finally got, for the first time in Minnesota history, a dedicated account in state government meant to help defray the costs of elections. I say defray because they're not a buyout. They're not the state government paying for that entire service. And to be fair, I've never met an administrator in the county or city level who has asked for that. But they are, in my experience, asking for some help. And there's precedent for that. You know, when the legislature passed the presidential nominating primary in 2016, that took effect in 2020, meaning from now on, the political parties would choose their delegates to national conventions not through the caucus process, but through an actual honest to goodness statewide election. Um, we and counties and cities went to the legislature and said, if you're going to do this, you got to help pay for it. Because what you're asking in a presidential year is you're asking Dave Triplett and anyone else who administers elections in Minnesota every 4 years, you're saying, you know what, instead of doing two statewide elections that are complete upheavals for your staff with a ton of moving parts and resources and focus and attention, we're going to ask you to do three. Instead of the November general election and the August primary, now you're going to have to do a third one, and it might be in the middle of your property tax season or whatever it is. And so the legislature, to its credit, on a bipartisan basis, said, you know, you're right. We're going to appropriate some money so that we can help make counties and cities whole. So based on that principle, we said, well, why not expand that to elections other than just the presidential nominating primary? And again, to their credit, on a bipartisan basis, legislators have done that. So we now have the Minnesota Voter Fund. I wish there was more money in it. So I want to temper expectations. There's a few $1 million in it, which if you divide by 87 counties is not a fortune. I'd love to see a zero at the end of that. But the point is we've planted a flag, so to speak, and we now have the precedent in place, and we have an acknowledgement by legislators in their words and in their deeds that elections are expensive. They take a lot of resources, and that local governments need some help and deserve some help in that regard, particularly when you heap on their plates a brand new election like the statewide presidential nominating primary. I want to just say a couple words about, you heard Dave mention, and thanks for the plug, our website, mnvotes.gov. You know, it really is a great resource, I have to say. If you go to mnvotes.gov, you can, on that website, register to vote. You can order a ballot to come to you and vote from home on that site. You can find your polling place. And increasingly popular, you can find what's on your ballot. You know, I get asked a lot, and I'm sure all of you do too as well, from constituents. They'll say, well, you know, I know the obvious things about what's on the ballot this year. I know we have a governor's race and a U.S. Senate race, but are we voting for county commissioner in our area or school board, or is the state auditor up this year? I don't know. I know about the big stuff, but I just don't even know in my area what we're voting on this year. Well, if you go to that homepage at mnvotes.gov and you type in your address, up will come, not now because we don't know the candidates, but post primary, when we know who's on the general election ballot, up will pop a true sample ballot for any voter in Minnesota. You type in an address, up will come a sample ballot of every contest and every candidate in every contest, plus their website if they furnished it to us. So it's a great resource that people have really liked. I urge you to take a look at it. Quickly, I want to say a word, because I've been asked to, about the role of the federal government, because that's top of mind for a lot of people. I have two ideas or things that occurred to me. One has to do with the role of the federal government in effectuating this critical infrastructure designation. As I mentioned, Since 2016, we in the elections world, not just at the state level, Dave Triplett too, we've enjoyed this designation. However, I am disappointed to report that in the last year and a half or so, there has been, in my judgment, a seeming retreat from the federal government in helping states and local governments on that score. And I want to give credit where it's due, by the way. I don't want anyone to think this is a political statement that I'm making. Under the first Trump administration, Trump 1.0, I would give them an A in this area. They were outstanding. And I don't just mean the civil servants, I mean the political appointees. Excellent partners, excellent allies. We got things like intelligence briefings. We got things like penetration testing from CISA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. Penetration testing, that's a fancy term for white hat hackers who come in at our request and do everything they can to hack us. We invite them to penetrate our systems, find the soft spots and the weaknesses. They were doing that. They were helping us coordinate tabletop exercises across the state of Minnesota for our partners in law enforcement and elections administration, where we would literally, over the course of a day or two, game out disaster scenarios. None of those things are things that they're doing this year. So for whatever reason, the Department of Homeland Security has seemingly retreated from that mission. Now, the good news is we're filling those gaps in almost all areas. We're finding other people, private vendors, to do some of those things. The one thing that we can't fill is you can't get a private vendor to give you a secret level intelligence briefing. That we can't do. The rest we are seeking to fill. So I just want to put you at ease that though I'm disappointed with that seeming retreat, we're filling those gaps, and it should be something we hope that people won't even feel, because we'll get those services wherever we can. We wish it were coming from our federal partners. It's not. The other thing I wanted to mention, only because so many have mentioned it to me, is the prospect that people mention to me all the time of some sort of federal interference, direct or indirect, even unintentional, but intentional also, with the upcoming federal election. And I will just say that it's we are actively working with partners nationally and within Minnesota to game out those scenarios. And by doing that, I want to make clear it's not a prediction that that will happen. Not at all. I hope it's like the power outage, that it won't happen. And it's one of those things we plan for that's a remote contingency, a remote possibility. But though it's not a prediction, it is a precaution. And I think it would be irresponsible of us not to game out with partners a what if scenario. So what if there's a last minute executive order, as there already have been two? What if there's a Halloween, let's say, executive order that bears on elections? What if there's something that happens with the Postal Service? What if there is an FBI style seizure, like the kind there was a few weeks ago in Atlanta, in Fulton County, where the FBI came in and raided an elections office? Again, I want to make very clear, I don't want to be alarmist here. I'm not predicting any of those things will happen. Or ICE at the polling place. That's another one that I get frequently, especially given what we all went through this past winter. I got a lot of people asking me, well, what about ICE at the polling place? What about, federal law enforcement at the polling place? There, actually, I think we have two really good answers, and I want to end there. First, to people or communities that ask me about that, ICE or federal presence at the polling place, I say this. Look, I think that's a very remote possibility. We just had an ICE surge here. It seems highly unlikely to me that we'd see something like that again. But let's just entertain the hypothetical that it isn't 6,000 people, but maybe just 200 people, and it's at select precincts or voting places around, let's say, Ramsey and Hennepin County. Just indulge the hypothetical for a second. What I remind people in communities who approach me and us about that is, remember, as Dave Triplett said in his presentation, you don't have to go to a polling place, right? So to those of you and your constituents who are concerned about that, regardless of what the odds are, I would just remind them of their option to vote from home. Nobody has to go anywhere. No one has to run a gauntlet of anyone or anything anywhere. You can vote from your couch. You can vote from your kitchen table. Number two, we have good and very precise laws in the state of Minnesota about presence and activity in and around polling places. Just as a refresher, the only folks who can be within 100 feet of a polling place are voters, election workers, anyone who naturally works in that building, the school, the city hall, the church, etc. And every major political party is entitled to send one person, not a swarm or a mob of 50, one, has to be designated in writing, to be the eyes and ears of that political party. And even then, there are strict and very precise laws about what can be said and done in the polling place. Literally, like no one can stand within 6 feet of a voter, no one can talk to a voter, etc. What about law enforcement? Some of you may know this through your own work, but just as a refresher, if you do, Minnesota law is also very precise about that. And the law, in essence, says that it is unlawful in Minnesota to preemptively post law enforcement personnel at a polling place, preemptively. So even if it comes from the best of intentions, even if any of you, a mayor, a city council, a sheriff, even with for all the right reasons, if that person says, you know what, just to calm people down, let's put a cop at the door over at precinct 3. Or just to make sure everyone knows it's secure, let's put a sheriff's deputy over at precinct 11. Even though that comes from a great place, that is not lawful under Minnesota law. Now, what is lawful and what is common sense and what is written explicitly in the statute is, of course, law enforcement can be called in immediately to respond to something. Of course, if there's a fist fight that breaks out in the polling place, you can call the cops. Of course, if someone faints or someone pulls a gun or whatever, that's not a thing that typically happens. But of course, yes, law enforcement has a role to play. But the key thing is our analysis is that those laws that I just described apply not only to local and state, but also to federal law enforcement. So that's a long way of saying that I am cautiously an optimist about the next 179 days, because as to any potential interference, be it from the federal government or otherwise, no system is perfect. Ours isn't either, but we really do in Minnesota have the laws, the tools, the partnerships, the alliances. We certainly have the resolve to overcome those kinds of challenges. And I am optimistic that with all of us pulling in the same direction, which we are, and with great partners like Dave Triplett and Ramsey County and others throughout the state, I really do think we'll be able to deliver on, though, at least my personal aims for this election: high turnout, low drama. I think we're going to get there. So with that, thank you for your time and attention. Thanks for being great partners in the democracy business, by the way, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Secretary Simon and Dave Triplett. Excellent presentations. Actually, I think you anticipated a number of my questions. And so we're going to move to questions now. Feel free to raise your hand or to put the question in the chat. I see that Pete Lindstrom got an early in, and so I'm going to hand it to you, Pete, to ask your question.
Great presentations, both of you. Appreciate it. My question is on universal mail voting, where everybody who's a registered voter gets a ballot in the mail, maybe with some prepaid postage attached to the envelope. And my understanding is is happening in Colorado and Oregon, maybe other places too. Um, Minnesota did a whole ton of things. Mr. Secretary, as you mentioned in 2023, lots of really positive things. This wasn't included in one of them, and I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on universal mail voting?
Well, you're right. First of all, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see
And
you too. Great job.
And I want to say that yeah, there are a number of states. I think we're up to 7 or 8 now. Utah, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California is transitioning to that system. Um, I like our multiple choice system. So for those who want to vote that way, we have it, right? If people, and it is increasingly popular, people who want to vote from home by mail, they can have it. But for those who like the traditional experience of going to a polling place, they can do that. And those who want to do sort of the hybrid approach, as Dave Triplett said, which is in person before election day, they can have that too. So I personally prefer that multiple choice option to what those states have, which is that everyone in those states gets mailed a ballot. But look, I don't pretend to say that isn't the right system for them, and they're sort of political or civic culture that seems to be working for them. And maybe there will be a shift to that someday in Minnesota. But my own view is I like giving people options.
Mr. Lindstrom, I'll add that in Minnesota, We do now have permanent absentee voting. So if you do
Right.
like just having a ballot mailed to you, there is that option. So you don't have to fill out the application every time. So in a sense, we allow the options in Colorado and Oregon if you so choose it, but you got to sign up as what's called a permanent absentee voter, and that was newly authorized in 23 or 24.
Right. Great point.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, Paul, go for it. You had your hand up.
Hi, and hi, Steve. Nice to see you.
Hey, Paul.
I have described you as being annoyingly fair. I hope you will accept that as a compliment.
Huh.
Um,
From you, yes.
okay. There are times when people wanted you to be partisan and you would refuse, and I think that's something to be respected. I appreciate that. Actually, I was interested in comparing, and you're supposed to laugh a little bit more at that, Steve. Okay. I wanted to compare California and Minnesota a little bit. They have these mail-in ballots that can be postmarked by election day
Right.
and counted, and I don't like that because the balance of Congress is often decided by these races in congressional races in
Right.
California, and I'm just wondering if that is one of the reasons that we don't do that in Minnesota.
Yes, it is. Great point. Some of you may know that the Supreme Court right now, as we speak, is deciding that very issue. There's a Supreme Court case on whether it is even lawful for states to do that. And by the way, it's fascinating to me. There are 14 states that have the rule that Paul just described, a postmark rule, where as long as you postmark your mail-in ballot by election day, it's okay if it gets in by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, even into the next week and beyond. We're not one of those states, to be clear. So this Supreme Court ruling will not affect Minnesota in any way. But the 14 states include, let's just say, diverse political complexions. California and Mississippi are among the two states that do it, maybe for different reasons. But I agree with you, Paul. I like our rule, which is and has always been, except during COVID, that was a special one-off. But our rule has always been you got to get your ballot there by election day. And I agree with you. I like it. I think it gives people finality. The results earlier. I agree with you too. I mean, just, you see some of these congressional seats aren't decided until a week and a half, 2 weeks after the election. So I like that. Um, but I do understand the motivation of other states. In some cases, it has to do with overseas and military voters, where it's harder for them to get their ballot back in time. I could see that as an exception that maybe Minnesota or other places would want to entertain. But generally speaking, I agree with you. And more importantly, I think legislators over the years and decades have agreed with you, which is, hey, all in all, better to have a deadline that has earlier clarity and finality. So again, for your constituents, remember, we don't have a postmark rule. We have a gotta get there by election day rule. And as Dave Triplett helpfully said, remember, just because you get it by mail doesn't mean you got to return it by mail. If you're nervous about the postal service, you can always take that ballot, hand deliver it. In most cases, you can give it to a trusted person to deliver for you with an asterisk there because there are limits to the number of ballots people can bring in. But that system, I think, has served us well.
Thanks. If I could just follow up to I also appreciate the continuous improvement you're always working on. I know with the Franken Coleman recount in 2008, when you were in the House, we changed how absentee ballot validity was looked at. It wasn't done by a precinct by precinct basis. So as we've
That's
had
right.
stress on the system, we've made improvements over time, and that's great. Thank you.
Great. We've got 1 minute left, and I'll leave it for anybody who wants to close. I think we've got Pete Lindstrom who's interested. And then we also have a quick survey while Pete is asking his question here. So feel free to complete your survey while we get this question out and answered.
Quick question. Again, back to 2023, I think Minnesota passed a legislation regarding AI and deepfakes, or at least on deepfakes, making it a crime to knowingly create or pass on some sort of deep fake information. Uh, we've had an election or two since then. I'm curious. I suspect there's been some deep fakes out there, but I don't know for sure. Has anybody been prosecuted or charged with anything like this? And how is that something that still keeps you up at night, so to speak?
Well,
AI or
yeah.
deep fake type of uh, items, things. Thanks.
Yeah, we did. Minnesota did pass an anti-deepfake law. We were one of the first 3 or 5 in the country to do that. And it affects only the campaign realm, so not election administration. We don't administer that. That's others do that. It's some combination of the Campaign Finance Board and then um, the Court of Administrative hearings as well. But I will say, I don't know of any prosecutions under that new law. And just to level set for everyone, what the law says is in a campaign, it is unlawful now to use AI to, if, um, to use an AI image or anything of the kind, um, if you didn't get the permission from the person depicted, and only if it's for the purpose of influencing the outcome of an election. That last part was meant to insulate humor, comedy, parody, right? So if Saturday Night Live does a sketch with an AI Tim Walz or an AI Donald Trump or whatever, they're not on the hook. That's First Amendment protected, right? And it's not for the purpose of influencing the outcome. But if it's a candidate A has an AI image of candidate B doing or saying something that candidate B never did or said, that is unlawful in Minnesota. And I don't know of a particular case. I don't know of one. Maybe some of you do. We don't administer that, but it's an interesting law. Um, Nor has it been challenged constitutionally or otherwise. So we'll see. Maybe it'll take another election or two to see what comes of that.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us, and huge thanks and a round of applause for Secretary Simon and for Dave Triplett. We so appreciate your passion and diligence to making sure that we have both high voter turnout and low drama in our upcoming elections. And just want to put a plug in for our next program in June. We'll be talking about the Met Council's comprehensive planning process and requirements that we as cities, the county, and townships, I believe, don't quote me on the township part. I just made that up as I'm going along here, but are required to develop and submit. So with that, thank you, everybody. Have a great spring, and we'll see you again in June. Goodbye. Pete, what is the requirements for townships? Do they do comp plans? I just thought of that as I was talking. It's like, what's the requirement? Oh, you're muted, by the way.
It's a great question. I think some do, but I don't know
They
if
may
they
not be
are
required,
legally.
are they? I wonder. I don't know. Well,
This is something I should know.
I will save it for next month. I'll ask next month.
Who's our speaker? Is it Lisa Barajas or
I believe it's
Yes.
Lisa, and I think there was another speaker as well, right, Noel?
Another speaker, Angela. I don't know her
Angela?
last name. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep.
If you
Well,
want
and
me to
and
say any introductory comments or anything like
yeah,
that,
I
happy to do
I
so.
think that'd be great if you'd want to do that.
I'll get my
I'll
90
put you on the
PowerPoint
schedule.
slides ready and
Okay.
Not,
Well,
no
I'll look
need
forward.
for
I'll prepare
those.
everybody
Just
for
a
that.
just thanks for being here.
Yep.
And here are the experts.
exactly.
And here I'll turn it over to Lisa and Angela.
Perfect. Hey, thank you so much, Peter.
Love
Great program.
Yep. Have a good weekend. Take care.
it.
See
Bye,
ya.
Peter. Bye, John.